Good afternoon and welcome to today's Grad Prof Dev webinar, General Tips for Resumes and CVs. I'm Heather Brandt, Associate Dean in the Graduate School and Professor in Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior in the Arnold School of Public Health. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment to remind our live viewers who are joining us about a few housekeeping items. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the webinar toolbar. We have 5 handouts for today's webinar. You can access these handouts under the handouts ribbon on the webinar toolbar. And if you have questions during the webinar, please enter those questions under the questions ribbon on the webinar toolbar. If you're viewing the recorded version, or if you have any issues accessing the handouts for today's webinar, please email gradprofdev@sc.edu to receive a PDF of today's handouts. Let's go ahead and get started. In today's webinar, I will cover a few main categories to provide you with general tips. First, I'm going to give an overview of resumes and then CVs, but begin with the comparison of what each one actually is for and does. I will also focus on the University of South Carolina Career Center resources that are available to support graduate students in developing their resumes and CVs. I will share information about our Grad Prof Dev professional development programming for graduate students, and there will be time at the end for your questions and answers. And as a reminder, please use the questions ribbon on the webinar toolbar to enter your questions. So let's get started. First, one of the questions that we get a lot in our professional development programming is related to the differences between a resume or a curriculum vitae or CV. And from here forward, I'll use CV as the acronym. So right off the bat, a major difference between a resume and a CV is that a resume is only a couple of pages in length. In fact, ideally, no more than 1 to 2 pages. The resume is very concise and to the point and focused on a summary of skills, education, and experience that is specifically tailored to a particular position. Contrast that with a CV, which has no page limit. In fact, you will find academic CVs among accomplished senior scholars that are hundreds of pages long, outlining their complete career history in terms of grant funding, publications, presentations, teaching, student mentoring, etc. It is a comprehensive overview of all of these achievements. Resumes are written for employers, and they are written to help you move to the top of the pile and secure an interview. CVs are written for academic audiences, typically within your discipline. And CVs are used when applying to academic positions, as well as for funding and fellowship applications. Resumes are more of a marketing tool that will highlight your fit for a position and again, get you to an interview. CVs have wide variability between disciplines. This is an important note about today's webinar. Today's webinar is providing general tips about resumes and CVs specifically for graduate students. However, you do want to make sure that you're working with a faculty mentor or faculty mentors in your discipline and looking at examples from individuals in your discipline to be sure that the information that you are including in a resume or a CV is consistent with the standard expectations in your discipline. So let's get started first with general tips on resumes. Often we get asked questions about the most appropriate time for a graduate student to provide a resume for a position. This can be a little bit unclear from time to time, but the best way to think of a resume is that it is this concise summary document. So resumes are documents that are requested by employers in many fields outside of the academic arena. Most private sector, nonprofit, and government jobs require a resume rather than a CV. And in terms of federal employment, a specific format and type of CV is required, resume is required in lieu of a CV, and you should be sure to work with someone in the University of South Carolina Career Center to prepare a federal resume. Resumes are a summary of your selected professional experience in the context of where you want to go next. They're not meant to be comprehensive, and they're not meant to list in detail every activity or accomplishment. And resumes, again, serve as this marketing tool to help market yourself to get an interview for a specific position. You determine the message of information provided on the resume for a particular job. The skills that you illustrate in the resume should match the requirements of the job. And if you're applying for multiple types of jobs or with multiple types of employers, you likely will find much more success in your application process by creating and using multiple versions of your resume. Resumes, again, are very concise summaries of your experience, education, and skills specifically related to a job or position. You'll want to make sure you are familiar with the industry, career field, and organizations of interest to you. It will help you write a more effective resume if you do this research and are informed about prospective employers. The University of Pennsylvania Career Services Center has an excellent step-by-step guide on how graduate students can prepare successful and effective resumes. The resource URL, you'll notice, is in the bottom lower left corner of the slide. These 4 steps I'll take a few moments to talk about in more detail, but in essence, the first step involves listing accomplishments. The second is finding the position to which you want to apply. The third is tailoring that list of qualifications to match with the position. And lastly, you're going to take a look at samples and resources to create draft versions and work to proofread those. So first, this list that you're going to make is going to form the basis of your resume and will help you identify accomplishments. And again, these should be tailored to a specific position, and you only have 1 to 2 pages. Eventually, you're going to have to choose what to include or exclude, but initially, you want to make a detailed and comprehensive list at this stage. So think through any skills that you would like to emphasize. For example, if you want to stress your organizational abilities, you'll want to write descriptions that incorporate specific accomplishments demonstrating your organization abilities. That's a common one we hear from graduate students. Also, your oral and written communication skills. What are then examples of specific and successful application of those skills? Those are the types of things that get included in a resume. These are also examples of the different types of information you'll want to list. This is truly just brainstorming about you and your background and experience to make sure that when you find a position, you can then pull from this list to compile the appropriate information in the resume. The next step is to find a job to apply to, or at least a type of a job that you're interested in. There's really no such thing as a one-size-fits-all resume because each resume should be tailored to a position. So let me say that again. It's an important take-home message. Each resume should be tailored to a specific position. It's a concise summary, just 1 to 2 pages of your experience. There will be some parts of the resume document that will stay the same all the time and will be appropriate for multiple jobs, but most of a resume will evolve and change as you're thinking about talking in the language of a prospective employer and making sure that the skills match up. Again, the purpose here is for you to get an interview, to catch the attention of a prospective employer, demonstrating how you meet the requirements and skills for a position. And then in the interview, you will have the opportunity to be able to expand. So be sure that as you're thinking about compiling a resume, that the list is comprehensive as the first step. And the second is finding a position or multiple positions that you can use to tailor your resume. Go through a job advertisement or position description to make note of the requirements and skills that a provider is, that an employer is looking for. You'll want to take a look back at the list you've developed in step 1 and use this list to tailor the resume. You also will want to understand the background of the employer, the language, people you maybe have spoken to. Later this semester, we'll do an informational interview webinar on how to conduct those. And perhaps you will have had a chance to talk to someone previously, not about getting a position, that's not the purpose of an informational interview, but had the chance to learn more about the values of the organization, the type of work that's happening in that organization. And that's insightful information for you to use when creating a resume to show that you have the skills and meet the qualifications for a particular position. The fourth step is to use examples to create your resume. Use some of the samples and resources that are available to you through your faculty mentors, through your peers, through recent graduates or alumni of your program, also through those available online. In the link at the bottom there for preparing effective resumes from the University of Pennsylvania includes a wide range of examples of resumes, and there are other such resources available. In this stage, this fourth step here, you'll want to experiment with the format. Try to find a format that looks and feels comfortable to you and will put forward a professional face to a prospective employer. You'll probably have to pare down irrelevant information. These tend to be very difficult to write when you all have so much to tell about your experience. So on those 1 to 2 pages in preparing this concise summary, what are the main points you want to be sure to emphasize? And those should be tailored and aligned with the position description. Have your resume reviewed by a faculty mentor and or advisor, and preferably more than one. You'll also want to have the resume reviewed by the University of South Carolina Career Center, and then make at least one more draft before you produce the final version. And you are likely to have multiple versions of a resume. It's just the way that it goes, because the most effective resumes are these short, concise descriptions that are very clearly aligned with a particular position. So let's talk about samples. The sample I'm showing here on the screen is actually an undergrad sample. However, I'm using it because of the very useful tips that are included here in the resume. How to list your information, no need to label certain pieces of information because it takes up additional space. So you'll want to look at examples for graduate students specifically. Again, several of those are available on the UPenn Career Services website at the link provided on the slide. And you'll want to make sure, most importantly, that your resume reflects the standards at your level and in the discipline that you're seeking to work. This includes your research of prospective employers. This includes your understanding of what's being asked in the position description, and making sure that you are prepared to put forward a strong and successful resume. When it comes to resumes, another word about formatting. So whether you're uploading your resume to an employer's job system or sending your resume by email, you'll always want to convert your resume to a PDF first, and make sure you label the PDF file with your full name first and last. For example, Susie Smith resume, or resume Susie Smith. Some combination so that it's easy to find your named resume by the file. And be aware that in some employers' job systems, you may not be able to attach a resume in PDF format. You may need to copy and paste it. In that case, you'll want to make sure that you don't have special characters and other restrictions that may happen within one of those systems. For resumes, you'll want to use a standard size font, 10 to 14 point, no smaller than 10 and no larger than 14. Remember, you only have 1 to 2 pages to create an effective resume. You want to be sure to build the resume employers want, connecting what you have to what employers need, and the first impressions matter. So how your resume looks is important. Make sure to use standard margins with at least a ½ inch margin all the way around. Try to keep the design simple if you're most comfortable with that, and that's what's important in your discipline. Use white space, skip lines between sections. Use keywords to describe your assets. There are a number of examples of various action words to use about the work that you've been doing. Your contact information should at least have your name, address, telephone, and email. Those are the most important pieces of information. And now most of us may only have a cell phone as our main number. And if you're on the job market and that's the number you list on the resume, make sure that you're aware you'll need to answer that phone professionally every time there's a number you do not recognize. I also know it's commonplace to not answer calls from unknown numbers. So you'll want to make sure that your voicemail message is appropriately professional when you're on the job market. You'll also include various qualifications, professional summary or profile information, your education, honors, awards, and activities, experiences, a host of other options for information that you may want to include as part of your resume. What you do include is up to you, but most importantly should be matched with the position description. So a resume, again, is just a 1 to 2 page concise summary, and the resume should focus on your key skills and key experiences that are aligned with a position. The purpose of the resume is for you to get an interview and have the opportunity to be able to expand on that information. Here are a few examples of resumes for graduate students in particular. As a reminder, you can access the slides right now if you're viewing the webinar live with these links on the webinar toolbar under handouts. If you have any difficulties or if you're viewing the recorded version of the webinar, please email gradprofdev@sc.edu for a PDF of the slides and today's handouts. Here are also examples from UPenn as well as the Career Center. And remember, an effective resume should do 2 things. It should tell people where you've been and foretell where you're going, and serve the main purpose of getting you an interview. Let's move on to general tips on CVs. The CV is a comprehensive statement of your educational background, teaching, and research experience. It is the standard representation of credentials within academia. There are various formats of a CV. For example, perhaps a 5-page limit CV, or a CV that only includes grants and publications in peer-reviewed journals, as was one example. As with resumes, being familiar with the particular standards in your discipline and for your discipline, those are important considerations to have when preparing a CV. The purpose of the CV is to provide this comprehensive statement, and a full CV is generally only used when applying for academic positions in 4-year institutions. You want to be sure to talk with your mentors about whether or not to use a CV when applying to community colleges, as just one example of where the expectation may not be to submit a full CV. As noted, other positions may request different information or information in modified styles for the CV. While resumes are tailored to the position, I want to also emphasize the importance of tailoring your CV to a specific position. So while the CV details all your academic credentials and professional accomplishments and is used for faculty jobs as well as applying for academic postdoctoral research opportunities, grants, and fellowships, the purpose of the CV is to interest a committee in interviewing you. So a similar purpose to the resume, but in a different format and with different information, much more expansive and comprehensive information. So although there's basic information that will always appear in your CV, you will again select the message of accomplishments that show you're a strong candidate for a particular job. In ordering your CV, it is important to pay attention to the position requirements and type of school. For example, if you are applying for a position at a teaching-focused liberal arts college, the CV should strongly emphasize teaching. And in fact, you may move teaching up to the first section of the CV after your contact information, educational background, and relevant professional experience. The same is true for a position at a research-intensive university where you will likely move your research interests peer-reviewed publications, grant funding, postdoctoral experiences, etc., up to the beginning after those main components. CVs will vary from discipline to discipline in addition to varying in the type of position to which you're applying. So you should make sure to look at the CVs of others in your field. This includes fellow grad students, postdocs, new faculty, experienced faculty. Show your CV to your faculty mentors. Keep in mind that different fields have different CV conventions, and the advice I'm sharing in today's webinar are just general tips for you in preparing a strong CV. As with a resume, the University of Pennsylvania Career Services, Penn has created this really easy step-by-step guide, and I'm going to talk about each of these steps in a little bit more detail, but not specifically step-by-step. So before drafting your CV, you'll want to review all your qualifications. So similar to how you would prepare a resume, you'll want to list everything, create category headings, and list everything that you've done. If you're not already tracking that as a graduate student, start now and go back to the beginning of your graduate degree program to make sure that you're keeping track of every time you may be invited to give a guest lecture, to attend a class, take a training program, attend a workshop, participate or present at a conference. All of that is going to go on a CV and show your strong record of participation in an academic environment in particular. The second step is to find a job or an example of a job that you may want to apply to. This can help you understand how you may organize your CV. And sorry about that, a step before that's very important is exploring and understanding the conventions in your field for CV composition. So this is taking time to look online. Most faculty have this information available online for you to be able to take a look at the CVs of people in your field and also at other institutions. Go through job advertisements and note the requirements and skills that people are looking for. This is an easy step when you've looked at and understand the conventions in your field and you've prepared a long detailed list of the various skills that you contribute. And lastly, again, use these examples and resources to create a draft version of your CV. Key components of a CV. So every CV should include information about your education and relevant professional experience. Content suggestions are that you organize each section in reverse chronological order. So that means listing your most recent activities first and then going back in time. And then put the most important information on the first few pages. So that would be the case in a teaching intensive institution where you would want to move your teaching or pedagogical training information to come first, because the first few pages are where you're going to have the greatest attention from those who are reviewing it. Some standard CV categories will include your name and contact information, education, honors, publications, grant, technical competencies, a host of different ones that will be specific to your discipline, and there are many sections to a CV that can be added. The purpose is to make sure that your CV includes these categories, whether they're standard or optional or often seen or not, to showcase your strengths in relation to the job and position that interests you and expectations for someone in your discipline to be prepared for that type of position. And again, you'll organize and align the CV based on the position to which you're applying. As with resumes, there are important CV formatting tips for you to take into consideration. For a CV, using 10 to 12 font size, Times New Roman and Arial are considered standard fonts, professional fonts. This will again vary by discipline. Using bold, italics, all caps, and underlining to denote sections and subheadings. I want to take a moment to talk about underlining. Underlining has become an area in CV development that is debated a little bit, because oftentimes in publications, people will use underlining in some disciplines to denote a student author, or perhaps your CV will traditionally include hyperlinks. And so if an item is hyperlinked, it's going to be underlined. So there's some questions about whether or not underlining is the most effective way to format a CV, especially given our options. Back to font for just a moment. You should never use more than 3 types of font, and preferably only 2 types of font. One perhaps for your sections or subheadings, and one for the actual content. Use lines in terms of separating various sections. This goes back to some, it's not underlining, but using lines or other design elements to try to create that separation. Use action-oriented verbs when you have to provide that type of information. Make sure that you have 1/2 inch to inch margins. Remember, for a CV, there's no length maximum. So you can, if it looks better for 1 inch, use the inch margins. If you need more space, use the 1/2 inch. And you want to make sure that the margins all the way around are exactly the same. Balance white space with text to give yourself a breather to the person who's looking at your particular CV. And make sure to list information in chronological order within each section. And in some cases, the convention is, again, to use reverse chronological order with the most recent first. This is something you'll want to check on within your discipline. Subheadings make information much easier to find. And down in the bottom footer of your CV, make sure your name appears. And if your name appears, you also can easily ensure that there's a page number. And even possibly after your name, in between the page number, you would be able to include a date of the CV. Since academic CVs tend to change fairly rapidly over time, this is something that you'll want to make sure is updated and that you're aware of the version that you're using. As with any document that you're going to provide to prospective employers, and in this case with a CV, prospective funders, or for those who are considering you for various honors, awards, fellowships, etc., make sure to proofread and that your CV is error-free. So now I'd like to take a moment to direct you to the webinar toolbar, to the polls that are available. So the first poll is how often do you update your resume? And so that poll is being launched right now, and if you would indicate how often do you update your resume or CV, with the options being as often as needed, monthly, quarterly, every 6 months, or every year. There's no right or wrong answer, because this will vary given your time in your graduate degree program, how much you have, and how quickly it happens to be able to add and include in a CV. So I'm going to give you just another few seconds to answer the poll that's in progress, and then I will move on. For those of you who are viewing the recorded version, features like polls are only available during live viewing. It looks like 75% of those who are joining the webinar live update their resume or CV as often as needed. 17% do it annually, and 8% every 6 months. So that is pretty much what I would suspect, some type of distribution. I actually try to update my CV at least quarterly and monthly if I can get to it. It's definitely on my to-do list to try to update monthly. In my position currently, I'm having a number of papers published or submitted, or grant applications submitted, or grants received, and that information comes fairly often, and so it's information to be added and updated, or particular committee memberships or service activities that are documented. So you really should update your CV as often as needed, but also for you to think about getting into the habit or pattern of updating, because you do want to make sure that you're able to take advantage of not missing things that you're doing during your graduate degree program. I'm also going to launch another poll for you to answer here. Well, I'm going to continue on talking about CVs, and that is the question in the poll right now for those of you viewing live is, what resume or CV resources have you used previously? I'm going to go section by section here of oh, sorry about that. I have to close the poll here. So before we can move on to this next slide. So we have this poll live right now. So folks have used the Career Center, faculty in and outside of the department, professional organizations, and then other resources as well. If you have other resources that you've found, if those are available online or even those from your professional organization or society, if you would email those to GradProfDev with a note that these are great resources for graduate students with resumes and CVs as the focus of the development and preparation process, we would love to add those to our list. So please feel free to share those. I'm going to go ahead and close this particular poll now. It seems that all of you are using a wide range of resources that are available to you. All right, now on CV layouts. So it's important for me to once again give the caveat that the layout tips I'm about to share are general and not specific to a given discipline. You want to make sure to work with faculty members in your discipline to ensure that how your CV is laid out is the expected standard in your discipline and for positions that you seek. So first, I'm going to talk about the basic general information that generally does not change in a CV. This information is usually constant and gets updated only as there's edits to this information. So first, your names, address, phone, email, website, LinkedIn profile, whatever is standard in your discipline and that you have found a professional version of a CV to use, that's how you would make sure to share your information. As with the resume, including a phone number, you want to make sure you include a phone number that will always be answered professionally. Because you never know when a prospective employer may reach out to you about an interview or to get additional information. Your educational information is generally listed in reverse chronological order, so as applicable, your doctoral, master's, undergraduate. Graduate degrees other than doctoral or master's tend to appear before the undergraduate degree. Any honors and awards that you've received, and then your professional experience. When preparing a CV for this purpose, generally this is the time where you're going to remove positions that were not in your field or relevant to the work that you're looking to do. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, when I was in graduate school, I worked at a local gift boutique. And so that is not something that I would include on my CV, even though it was during my time in a graduate degree program. I would include the graduate assistantship that I had during that time period and other research assistantships at that time, but I would not include that I was working at a boutique, even though it happened during that time period, because this is a comprehensive summary of my professional skills and qualifications. And while I may have learned an awful lot from working in that gift boutique, it's not something that I would put in a professional CV. And that same is true of honors and awards. There's discussion about whether or not to include undergraduate awards or honors that are received. I think if you received an honor or award at any level of your academic career, that it's appropriate to include that on your CV. This is also something that you would want to check with folks in your discipline. All right, let's go to the next one, which is this research section. So layout is really crucial when it comes to research, and there are varied layouts and varied order for this content, and you'll want to, again, talk to someone in your discipline, take a look at examples online. There's no right or wrong way to present this information, but there are ways that make more sense and will make you more competitive. And in order to find those, it will take you doing some research and investigation. So when it comes to research interests, this is a brief answer to the question about your research expertise and information. Research techniques, computer skills, or other specialized skills. This is usually just a list, a bulleted list sometimes no bullets. You'll hear mixed recommendations for that. But if you're including, for example, technical skills, software expertise, laboratory research skills, you want to make sure that you list those. If you're proficient in using various graphic design softwares, various project management tools, this is where you'll include that information. Now, this may follow your research interests, or it may be included in another section. Grants. So including any funding that you've received. So as a graduate student at the University of South Carolina, if you've received SPARK funding, funding from the Women's and Gender Studies program, funding from the Institute for African American Research, or other such student-driven, student-led funding programs, you'll want to make sure you include those internal funds as well as external funds. So this section on grants should include your current grants first, then include submitted grants, and then completed grants. And using subheadings to differentiate those will help the reader and your prospective employer understand that, oh wow, they've applied for a number of grants, received these grants. You also can include grants that were submitted but not funded, if that's something that's accepted in your discipline. In the health sciences, I would say that would be important information to convey. Perhaps you have no current funding, okay, but you've submitted funding. That's excellent. Maybe you have some completed funding. That's great too. And then maybe there is a list of funding grants that you're looking to submit, so in preparation, or grants that were submitted but not funded, and if you have any information or feedback on those grants. That can help present the depth and breadth of your research funding interests and experience there. Publications and presentations. So publications can also be differentiated by subheadings. So with publications, you want to separate those by type and status. So peer-reviewed publications in a journal, book reviews, book chapters, edited volumes. There are all sorts of different headings that can be used to characterize publications. Then you can also indicate status. So something that is in press published or in press, something that's in review, and in some fields, including in the health sciences, you generally can include manuscripts that are in preparation. For how you list these citations should be consistent for your field. So maybe you use APA style, maybe you use a numbered style, maybe you use the JAMA style. They're all different styles, Chicago style. They're all different styles of ways to list your publications, and you want to ensure that they are done consistently using the same format. So not using one format here and one there. Presentations, you can include submitted presentations and those presented, probably the presented before the submitted actually. And then if you presented at a conference where you submitted an abstract and it was peer reviewed and you were selected for oral or poster presentation, roundtable presentation, conference panel, there are a wide range of different formats for delivery that you'll want to be clear about that. Maybe you also have been invited to give a presentation at a professional meeting, and you'll want to indicate that you were invited as well. So let's talk about the teaching section. So the teaching section is a critical section, especially for teaching intensive positions, but also for tenure track faculty positions. So teaching encompasses a lot of categories, and I've merely listed just a few of the most common that you see in this section of a CV. So courses taught, the name of the course. You can include descriptors in parentheses, but no one's going to know what HPEB 321 means. So you'll want to call it community and personal health, and then in parentheses, if it's helpful, HPEB 321. That way there's a course indicator and identifier, so if someone wants to take a look at the course online and get a sense of the purpose, rationale, other information about the course, they can. Your position, whether you were instructor of record, whether you were a teaching assistant, whatever your role or position was in the course. The level of the course, so indicating courses that are for undergraduate, graduate, or mixed. So here at South Carolina, we have undergraduate and graduate courses, of course, differentiated by level, but we also have those 500 and 600 level courses where you can have undergraduates and graduates in those courses. And so you'll want to make sure that you're clear about the level. And then dates. And semester is okay. So you can say fall 2019 semester for the course. And usually this information is organized by semester or by courses, depending on the breadth of your experience. For pedagogical training, any significant training courses you've taken, so for example, the Center for Teaching Excellence here at the university has an amazing lineup of courses for which as graduate students, you're eligible to participate. So they have 2 certificate programs, the Preparing Future Faculty program, plus other courses about pedagogy. Take advantage of those, and those can be included as pedagogical training on your CV to show that not only are you teaching in the classroom, and maybe even more importantly, if you're not teaching in the classroom, that it's of interest to you and you've been taking training courses to help improve your preparation to be an excellent instructor. Another section included in this part of the resume, student advisement and mentoring. Oftentimes, there's no advisement happening. A graduate student is not offering advisement, but perhaps you're offering mentoring. Perhaps you're working with a faculty mentor on supporting an undergraduate's Magellan application or Magellan funding or a research project, independent study, honors thesis. Those are all examples of mentoring that you may have been involved in. So mentoring generally, these are the informal relationships that become formalized and happen external to the classroom. If you're working on a research team or a scholarly endeavor that includes multiple people and you are working closely with an undergrad, providing some supervision, providing some direction, that could constitute a mentoring relationship for you to include here. So teaching, these are just a few of the examples. This information will differ depending on your discipline and also depending on the position. All right, under this section, we generally think of these items as service activities. So there's the basic information, research and scholarly activity information, teaching, and then service. And again, the order here may be different depending on your discipline and also depending on the position for which you're applying. So when it comes to service activities will include these major headings most often. In your discipline, they may be slightly different. Here at the University of South Carolina, these are very commonly used headings for service. So first, service to the profession. So within your discipline, if you're reviewing grants, abstracts, journals, doing book reviews, and book reviews in some cases are considered a publication, so that may be the case in your discipline, and you want to make sure that you learn more about that. Conference organizing, serving as a moderator at a conference, membership in professional organizations, any of that should go here under professional service. University, college, and department service. So if as a graduate student, you've been involved in a dean's leadership advisory council, you've served on a faculty committee as the student representative. Most search committees include at least one, if not two, student representatives. So any role you've played on committees internal to the institution, if you're involved in the Graduate Student Association, the Black Graduate Student Association, the International Student Association, and have held leadership roles across any of those or more than one of those, this is where you'll include that information as well. Community service. So if you're working with an advocacy group external to the university, working with a community organization or a community group, not everyone's scholarship lends itself to this type of community service, but if you have that information to include in your CV, this is where it will go. And then lastly, additional activities. So what are additional activities? Well, this could be any media, if you've been interviewed about your work, if there's been a web feature by the school, by the University of South Carolina, by your college or school, or by your unit about your work, if you've participated in any podcasts or other media, this is a good place to include those as additional activities. If you've written op-eds or you've been published in lay publications, you'll want to check with your discipline to see the most appropriate place to include that information, but often it's considered to be a piece of service for you to include here. As I'm finishing up with some of the content slides, just a reminder, if you have questions, please enter them under the questions ribbon on the webinar toolbar, and I'll be answering all of the questions here as soon as I finish with the content. And that's for those of you who are viewing the webinar live. So sample CVs. So this is an example, again, from UPenn of what the first page of a CV would look like. You can examine additional examples using the URL provided at the bottom of this slide. You also can look online. I mentioned how most faculty CVs are available. Not all examples are good examples, but for the most part, you can get a good sense of the appropriate layout of a CV for people in your discipline who are pursuing faculty careers, the appropriate sections, the type of information that's included. For those reasons, looking at examples can be really helpful. You can find someone's style or format or layout that seems to appeal to you and look professional. Those are all ways that can help you in preparing and really using that discipline-specific information in those examples to your benefit. You want to make sure that you're telling your story about your preparation and your career to date. So how have you been preparing yourself, gaining the skills needed to be a successful tenure-track faculty member, for example? How are you demonstrating that you have amassed those qualifications and expectations within your discipline? Well, by no means is my CV perfect. I thought I would share with you the first page of my CV. So I have a faculty position, also an administrative position. So at the top of my CV, you'll see that I've included my academic department office information as well as my graduate school information there. I've included my LinkedIn profile. I've included only my work phone numbers on this particular version. I've included my degrees, starting with my most recently received degree, which is my PhD. I've included my dissertation name and chairperson's information. This is really commonplace in the health sciences to have this information there. I also did a certificate of graduate study in women's studies and gerontology, and I've listed these in chronological order, reverse chronological order. I have a master's of science in public health. I wrote a thesis, so I've included the name of the thesis there, or excuse me, title of the thesis, as well as the name of the chairperson of my thesis committee. And then lastly, my undergraduate degree. If you have licensures or certifications in my discipline, it's commonplace to include those at the end of the education section. There are other places where this information can be included, but that's one place where you can include that information. And then I start on into my professional experience. And my professional experience, I've divided up into administrative appointments and then academic appointments. You can look at the full version of my CV. It's available on my faculty staff profile page using the URL on the link provided here. At the bottom, I have my name, I have the date because my CV is often being updated. I'm in the process of finishing my updates for it now. I will do it this month and then again at the end of the calendar year. And I like to keep track of the pages of my CV, so I've included the page information there as well. One of my favorite resources for developing graduate CVs comes from the University of Chicago's Graduate School. So they have an excellent guide with information and helpful tips about how to prepare a CV. And it is a general guide, but includes a lot of detailed specific recommendations. You'll still want to check with your discipline, but it's a helpful tool. So these are things you should do. So do this when preparing a CV. And we've covered almost all of these top 11 for the do this. And the last one I want to take a moment to talk about. The last tip here is keep your CV updated on your personal website. So as a graduate student, you may maintain a personal website, and if you do, it's up to you on how much you share that information, if you include it in the contact information on your CV for people to be able to have and bookmark. If you promote that link, you want to make sure that you keep it updated. As a future faculty member, you most definitely should have an updated CV on your faculty profile page. That's the norm in the industry right now, regardless of discipline. If you are unable to find a CV for a faculty member, it's most likely because the faculty member has not provided that information to be included on the website. So these are important tips for you in preparing a CV. And do not do this when preparing a CV, also from the University of Chicago. Don't expect people to read the whole document. That's why it's important to use very clearly delineated and defined section headers for people to easily access the information they want and need. You want to make sure that the first couple of pages are going to include the most pertinent and relevant information for a position. Assume a publication list replaces the need for you to have to describe your research. The same could be true of your grant funding if you include a statement about the overall purpose of a particular grant. So you do not want to assume that. You want to make sure that you are including bullets about a summary of keywords about your research program. You should not include a half-page summary of your dissertation research. Remember, as you move forward, getting a faculty position isn't about the dissertation research that you've conducted. It's about the work and research that you will conduct. You don't need to write curriculum vitae at the top. You don't need to list course numbers without the descriptors. You do not need to tack on employment. I gave you the example of how I worked at the local gift boutique. You don't have to include that information. It's irrelevant to the purpose of the CV. Don't use subjective claims or adjectives. There's no need for that. This is your academic record. You do not need to include photos, birth date, or other personal information. And number 9 is interesting. I included it in here. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with it because people include different pieces of information in their CV using different formats and layouts. But your CV as a graduate student who's just completing graduate work is really unlikely to be longer than a faculty advisor's CV, even if it's a junior faculty member. And make sure you do not undersell yourself. Just a reminder about questions as I finish up with a few of these resources. You have a number of resources here to be able to access, including the Career Center's guide and these other institutional resources. So let me take a moment to talk about the Career Center. The Career Center uses Handshake, and that's the Career Center's online career management platform. There are not as many opportunities for master's and doctoral and other graduate students to use, but it can be a helpful tool to get information about resources of the Career Center and learn more about the positions that are available. You can sign up for a free account by following the link here. The Career Center has drop-in hours Monday through Friday from 1 to 4 p.m. in level 5 of the Thomas Cooper Library or in their satellite office in Swearingen Hall. Take advantage of these opportunities to have your resume or your CV reviewed by professional Career Center staff. You can schedule an appointment with your designated career development coach by activating your account and Handshake. In addition to the university's Career Center, please make sure to check in with your department for other available resources. The Career Center offers other tools that may be of interest to you when you're on the job market, including virtual practice interviews, in-person mock interviews, and space for telephone and virtual interviews, private, secure space in the Career Center. Mark Anthony, who is the Associate Director of Career Development and Experiential Education in the university's Career Center, has written a really nice blog. It's short, it's sweet, and it's informative. You can access this on the grad school's WordPress blog site or click the link here. And he concludes with a few general recommendations to consider for graduate students when writing and formatting a resume or CV. So these are very succinct, and I want to point to the last one. Proofread and proofread again, and one more time proofread. Have someone else proofread. Take advantage of the Career Center's drop-in hours Monday through Friday from 1 to 4 p.m. to have your materials reviewed. Here are the Career Center resources for you to find easily, the resume writing and CV writing as well. So GradProfDev is the graduate school's professional development programming for our graduate students. And we have a number of resources that you can access. And you can access these slides under the handouts ribbon on the webinar toolbar or email gradprofdev@sc.edu to get a copy. We have a full calendar of events for the fall semester. And this month we have Writing Your Teaching Philosophy Part 1, Oktoberfest, which is organized by the Center for Teaching Excellence. It's a celebration of teaching and learning, and those proposals are due actually today, September 27th. And we'll have our next webinar on October 25th on how to conduct successful informational interviews. GradProfDev hosts Professional Development Fridays on each Friday during the fall and spring semesters on the graduate school's social media. And today's topic is preparing a resume. Last week's topic was preparing a CV. So if you're interested in doing this, you can take a look across our various social media accounts in these platforms and search for GradProfDev to get this information. Thank you for joining our webinar today. And after the webinar, you will receive a link to complete a brief evaluation. I hope you'll take a few moments to share that with us. Right now, I'm going to take a look at the questions that have been posted so far. So the first question is not really a question, but an important recommendation that this grad student has found it helpful to, quote, professionally stalk, unquote, other people's CVs and base formatting on what looks appealing from those. That's an excellent tip, and I hope one that will be a takeaway from this webinar on general tips on preparing resumes and CVs. Looking for someone in your discipline or in a related discipline who has a nice clean look to their resume or CV can be really helpful, and so I think that's a great information and suggestion. The next question is, do I need to give full info of the publication as we cite it in a paper? It becomes very long. Should I mention all the co-authors' names? Yes. The citation that you include in your CV should be the complete citation in the correct format. This can be challenging in some disciplines where there may be 50 plus authors, to be altered in the citation. You should talk with someone in your unit about the best way to abridge that information. I have seen this information abridged with the first 6 authors' names shown and then ellipses, so 3 dots, and then the name of the person in parentheses with the author order number. I have seen examples like that, but you should check in your discipline. The default response here is to include the full information and full citation for a publication. The next question is, if you didn't personally receive a grant, for example, you weren't the principal investigator or co-investigator, but worked on a grant-funded study, say by the Centers for Disease Control, should you put that on your own CV to show you've worked on a grant? If so, how might you make it clear? When you list grants on your CV, you should indicate your role clearly. If you're principal investigator of the grant, you may even have a subheading for those grants on which you served as principal investigator, which would imply that you were the primary person responsible for the development, the conceptualization, the submission of the grant. Then you may have a section for grants for which you were co-investigator, grants on which you were a graduate assistant. The most important thing here is if you want to demonstrate your research experience, that you're clear about your role. So you would clearly identify who served in the PI role, and possibly as a graduate student who served in a co-investigator role, and then your role. And there are examples of this online for you to be able to take a look at. All right, the next question is, does the Career Center do online appointments for resume advice? I am a distance learner and not local to Columbia. So the answer to this question is that there's no appointments necessary for the Monday through Friday drop-in hours from 1 to 4 p.m. If you're interested in making an appointment with your designated career services person for your unit, you'll want to sign up through Handshake. That is how you're able to explore appointment opportunities. For resume and CV review, there's strong encouragement to take advantage of those drop-in hours, which are designated for resume and CV review. We're almost out of time, but there are just a couple of different questions here that I will address before I end today's webinar. What's the difference between leadership and service, and how would you determine which activities go in which category on your CV? So this is a case where you may have actually included information in your service section to have subheadings about positions that you held that were leadership oriented versus membership. So just differentiating those by using subheadings or including that information will be helpful. How many pages is for a CV is standard in the industry? There is no standard. For folks who are early in their career, it may just be a few pages all the way up to some who have CVs that are hundreds and hundreds of pages long. So that definitely is the case. I've seen CVs that are 200 plus pages long that include an abridged summary at the very beginning. My CV right now is 55 pages long, and I've been a full professor for just the last couple of years. So I think that there's no standard, and a CV should be as long as it needs to be comprehensive. Well, I want to thank you all for your thoughtful questions and for joining us for today's webinar. I hope you found this information with general tips about resumes and CVs to be helpful. Before the webinar concludes, you can access the handouts under the handouts ribbon on the webinar toolbar. And if you have any issues, you may email gradprofdev@sc.edu to obtain a copy of the handouts provided during today's webinar. Also, you will receive a link to view the recorded version of this webinar. It will include all of the information you heard today, but you will not have the opportunity to access the handouts or take part in the polls and other live viewing functions. I want to thank you for, again, attending today. I hope you will take advantage of some of our Grad Prof Dev programming that's coming up this semester and in the future. And as always, we welcome your suggestions. Please feel free to email us at gradprofdev.sc.edu. Thanks for joining and have a great weekend.